Welcome back to another MR340 live webinar. Today, talking about safety and general FAQs, things that we should know going into the race. Of course, this time next week, you will have registered, you will have checked in at your first checkpoint. And if you hadn't, you have an hour and a half to do so. So get on it. Remember, registration is at Caw Point, noon to 8 tomorrow, or sorry, not tomorrow, Monday next week. And with me, I have Steve, the legend, Schnarr, from River Relief. He's a longtime safety boat captain, longtime helper with the race, and expert on all things river and all things mosquito, as we recently found out on Facebook. And then we also have the one, the only, the fearless, the sleepless. It is said that if you buy Scott Mansker a cup of coffee and offer it to him at the boat launch on Tuesday, it brings you good luck. It is said that if you continue to have your ground crew and other people inundate him with coffee, it brings you further good luck down the course. Yes, the one, the only, Scott Mansker. And of course, as you all know, he is the brains behind this. He is the one who started it. He is our everything. So with that being said, just a reminder to those of you joining us on YouTube or on Zoom, this is running as a webinar, which means we cannot see you, we cannot hear you. But if you have questions, if you go down in the lower part of your screen, there's a Q&A section. If you type in a question, we can answer it. If you type something into a chat, we can probably answer that as well. Otherwise, we'll get rolling. And if you have questions, we will save some of them for the last 10 or 15 minutes. Otherwise, let's get started. So now that I've gone out of the file that I needed, let's go back into it here. Try and find the thing that I was looking for. There we go. So let's start with the wrong list. That's what I just pulled up, the wrong list. Scott or Steve, what is the biggest concern that you have from a safety perspective for the race this year? What should people know?
So the biggest fear this year, like as opposed to any year, or just in general?
There's something that might be a bigger issue this year than usual.
You know, I can't think of anything that leaps out. I mean, it's looking like it is going to be higher water than we had first thought earlier in the summer. So safe to say it will not be a low water year. That means to me, everything's going to happen faster for the paddlers. So, you know, your reaction time has to be just that much sharper, especially at night, being aware of what you're coming down on. It also means less shoreline if there were to be a storm or something like that, or a fog bank that you paddle into and you need to get out of the river. There's going to be a little bit fewer opportunities for that. And the wing dikes, we may have them just at that level where they're just below the surface, which makes it a little harder to realize that you're, you know, approaching one. So, I mean, those are the things that come with higher water. I don't know. What do you think, Steve?
Yeah, I mean, and all of those things for sure. And one other, you know, factor this year is this appears to be the largest 340 ever. So I believe that the largest to date was 2018. I might be wrong about that, but this one is looking, it's tracking like it'll be a little bit larger than that. And this isn't as much of a safety issue, although it is a safety issue, especially for ground crews. You know, with the flooding a couple weeks ago, there's some, you know, a lot of standing water. There's some damage to some of the boat ramp areas. And all that kind of means less space for everybody, you know, so that means people need to be more patient, expect maybe to walk longer if they're a ground crew person. And you know, the flip side of having more people out there is everybody on this race is also a safety boat. They're a safety team for each other, so having more people out there isn't by itself more dangerous, in a lot of ways, that's more people looking out for each other. But with larger numbers, there's more people who've never done this race before. So people that are experiencing it for the first time, and may, have a lot more questions. So and we see this on the Facebook group a lot, for our veteran paddlers, that's an opportunity to share information, to help everybody make better decisions. And, we really see that on the Facebook group where people are asking questions and immediately there's 7 really good answers for them, from people that know what they're talking about. That's, deeply appreciated.
And now there's been a lot of talk on the Facebook group about ramps and potential problems at Franklin, at Waverly. Dalton Bottoms, of course, is washed out. You can't get to it. The ground crews can't get there. But what information do you have for racers on any of the ramps? Waverly, Franklin, any of the others that we should know?
I can start with Waverly. They're doing some construction on the downstream ramp. They're adding a barge terminal, I think, near that grain elevator down there. So there is equipment in the water that we'll need to watch out for. There's construction equipment in the parking lot. So parking at the lower ramp will be somewhat restricted, although our friend Rob Kaltoff down there, who always works the Waverly ramp and sets up all the volunteers there, he has talked to them and they are going to make an effort on Tuesday when they close up shop to move a bunch of that equipment as far as they can to accommodate parking. There will be food at both ramps put on by the local Boy Scout troop. So either ramp should work for you. That's something you'd want to powwow with your ground crew about before you left, probably. Dalton, you're right. It is years away from ever getting fixed, I'm sure, but it is still a boat ramp. You just can't get there by car. So we put a safety boat there. It kind of breaks in half that distance from Miami to Glasgow. So if you're, kind of thinking, gosh, I think I can make it to Glasgow, I'm not sure, you can at least make it to Dalton that night, and we will have a safety boat there. They'll be tied to, they're at the ramp, so you'll kind of be able to see them. Their lights will be on, and it's a place at least you can get out of the river if you need to, even if your ground crew can't get to you. And then Franklin Island, I am very hopeful that it's going to be open for the race. But, during this most recent big rain event, the basin where the road is, where you drive in, filled with water, not because the Missouri flooded it, but because a little creek that runs near there flooded it. And the water is having a hard time finding its way out. So it needs to come down like another 8 inches for the Missouri Department of Conservation just to get in there and reopen it. They don't suspect there's any damage. They just need to inspect it and open the gates. So I'm hoping that we've got over a week. I'm hoping that will be open, but we will have that information that will be available as late as, we may find out Tuesday afternoon that it's open. We have the ability to send a text to all the racers and ground crews. So, you might get a text when you're passing Lexington that, hey, Franklin Island just opened. So, that one's kind of up in the air. Anything I missed on Franklin Island, Steve?
Well, even if the road to Franklin doesn't open, we're working on getting a safety boat that will stay there and have supplies of some sort. So that would be, probably at the minimum water and calories of some kind. So we will have, something going on there, even if we can't get there by road. And that option will be there for paddlers. It just, if the road doesn't clear up, the ground crews won't be able to meet people there. there's kind of another potential, which we don't know, is Catfish Katie's, which is, I believe, another 17 miles downstream from Franklin Island, and it's about 10 miles upstream from Cooper's Landing, was planning on being closed. It's a private boat ramp, and they have a gate across it. They're planning on being closed for the race, but there's a potential that they could open it, and there would be basically, possibly no amenities. We would definitely scramble to get a porta potty there if that does happen. But that could be another potential place to meet your ground crew, so not everybody had to pile on at Cooper's, especially if Franklin wasn't available. And one thing that I'm not sure that you mentioned before, Chris, but I do want to mention, anybody who's watching this on Zoom, you can enter your questions that you have in the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. There's also a chat option. You can use that as well. And we won't answer those questions, simultaneously, but as this webinar goes on, we'll get to those questions as they come in. So
then, of course, one of the big concerns, safety concerns on the race every year, storms and fog. What are we looking at potentially for this year? What should paddlers know, especially when it comes to, say, safety boats, Steve, and their activities during a storm event, during a fog?
Sure. Storms are always a possibility, even if none are forecast at the beginning of the race. That's just how things roll here in Missouri. And the important thing to know, to consider with storms, is usually storms, these summer storms in Missouri will blow in with great intensity on the front end. And then they might kind of slow down to a gentle downpour, or maybe even misting or drizzling. But there's always that potential of being more highly impactful, intense storms coming behind. And when you're on the river and a storm like that hits, you can go from, calm and collected to white caps that you can't navigate with your boat in just a matter of seconds. That wind can really tear up just all of a sudden. So it's important for people to keep an eye on the sky. Look behind them occasionally. Look around at the sky. Pay attention if you feel a drop in temperature. You might stop and pause, see if you can pull up radar on your phone. Look around, see what signs there are. If you start seeing lightning, definitely see if you can get radar on your phone. Where's this thing going? Where's it coming from? And even then, pop-up storms are called pop-ups for a reason. They can appear literally above your head. So as soon as you see signs of something close to you, that is absolutely the time to get over to the side, and ideally get out of your boat and pull your boat out of the water. Because if a storm hits, a really intense storm hits, you won't have time to do that. And immediately it becomes a very difficult situation. We've seen that a few times on the race. Luckily, most storms aren't that intense on the front end, but that's something to look out for. Luckily, right now, there's nothing in the long-term forecast. Things are looking pretty good for the race. But it's Missouri, and that can change in a heartbeat. So,
and for people who are from Wisconsin or from out east, Virginia Beach, etc., who don't see storms like you do in Missouri, I will be honest, I was scared to death by the downpours the week before the 340 in Kansas City. I was there the week before for something else and couldn't see anything for the rain. Is there a way you can explain just how big these things can be and how powerful they can be without being
like too melodramatic?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. A common thing for a summer storm is that it's beautiful, and you think, oh, this storm, man, I think it's just going to blow by us, like it's going to miss us. But let's say it does pop up. all of a sudden you might just have super intense wind, and it could come really literally from any direction, depending on what's going on in the greater atmosphere. Once that wind hits, the waves can kick up, immediately, especially if you have wind that's going upstream. If you have a wind that's headed upstream on the river, which can be from literally any direction on the race course because the river just twists and bends around, so much, then it's going to pile those waves up, and immediately it'll be like you're right behind a barge and you've got to find your way to shore. Landing in a situation like that is really difficult. The waves are pushing you to shore, and if you're landing on a riprap bank, a rock bank, that's pretty difficult landing. That downpour, it can happen almost immediately too, or it can happen kind of later in the storm. But sometimes those downpours are so intense that we can get an inch of rain in 40 minutes or so. And again, that's the rare storm, and luckily they're not all like that. And during 16 years of doing this race, I think Scott just mentioned the other day, like he can kind of remember 4 of those really intense, memorable storms. So, there's been rain events in many years, but those big ones are luckily few and far between. And I'm knocking on wood as we speak, because that's how we love it. We like to get it out of the way before and after the race.
And what are the guidelines for the safety boats during a storm? At what point do they come off? Because of course, if they're not actively on the water, they aren't going to come and rescue someone. So where's that line roughly?
Yeah. In a situation like that, we would tend to respond to calls. So it's sort of after the storm hits. If there's emergency calls that come into safety boat dispatch, then we're going to see if we can scramble a boat to respond to those. Is there a boat nearby, preferably downstream, that can go upstream to hook up with that paddler or whoever might be, having an issue with that storm. But safety boats, just like everyone else, are going to tie up on shore to wait out a storm. If there's lightning, I didn't even mention lightning. Lightning's really the big crucial danger that can happen in these storms. And that is, a big reason to get off of the water. You do not want to be on the water, but especially our safety boats and metal boats, we don't want them out on the water during a storm like that. So it's generally going to be a second before they can respond to you after a storm. So everybody really does have to make smart decisions for each other and help other people make smart decisions to protect themselves first, so that once that big intense wave passes, we can start responding to things as they happen.
All right. And Scott, how about fog? Where do we usually see it? What should we know?
Well, I mean, piggybacking on what Steve said, the way to approach this race is, you're leaving one ramp and you're bunny hopping to another ramp. You're not leaving Kansas City and going to St. Charles. You're leaving Kansas City and you're going to Napoleon or wherever you're going to meet your ground crew. So, if the sun's going down and you're leaving Miami, the types of questions you should be asking the safety boat that's parked there or your ground crew, hey, have we heard anything about the weather tonight? Does the weather look good tonight? Is there anything I need to know on this stretch? And we'll tell you. We'll say, yeah, there's a 50% chance of thunderstorms after 2 a.m. That information is very available, and it's incumbent on every paddler to just think, okay, I've got 36 miles to go. What should I be packing on my boat? What if I am out there and this storm comes? If I'm in a t-shirt and my, little jogging shorts, is that going to be enough to protect me if I'm, pulled over to the side for a 90-minute cold rain? And how am I going to paddle after that? So, I mean, if you hear that there's going to be possibility of storms at night, you load out your boat differently for that bunny hop to the next ramp. You're aware that Dalton Access is an option for you on that hop. You're aware that, you know, between Cooper's Landing and Jeff City, you're aware of what options there are for ramps and things like that. So that is an awareness issue and a issue that you should always ask your ground crew if you've got a ground crew, or check your phone, as Steve said, and see what the weather's supposed to be. Fog is tougher to predict. There's certain areas of the river where it seems to be more prevalent. If there's a cold water tributary coming in sometimes to a warm river, that's like the mouth of the Osage River or the mouth of the Gasconade River. That's mile 130 for the Osage, mile 104 for the Gasconade. Those areas sometimes generate some fog. But again, you know, you generally know the fog, you know, you'll see signs of fog first. And then you can start thinking, okay, where's my emergency hatch to get off this river? But it can be as abrupt as rounding a bend and just the trees disappear, the moon disappears, and you're completely disoriented. So I would say, you know, word travels pretty well up and down the river. You know, you might hear as you're leaving somewhere that, hey, there's a bunch of fog at Miami. And if that's the case, you might make a decision not to go past Tills Island or something like that. But it's tough. I am no master of predicting fog. It has surprised me many years. There are nights where I was sure we'd see fog and there was none. And then there's nights where it just starts coming out of nowhere and, you know, you're blinded. But again, I will use this opportunity to stress to all who are listening, I don't care what kind of electronics you possess on your boat. Paddling in fog is a terrible, terrible idea. And you should do your best to find shore and get some rest and wait out that fog. My safety boat has radar, AIS, chart plotter, everything you could possibly want to go through fog. And I will be pulling over in fog 100% because I don't know what is out there, and neither do you.
Yeah,
go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, just to kind of follow on that, you know, last year we had an intense fog occur on at least several nights, but one night in particular. And there were some barges, towboats that were intending on moving during the night. But once that fog happened, they made the decision to tie up. And when a barge ties up, it's going to face upstream. So the towboat will be downstream, the barge will be upstream, and they may have some minuscule lights on the top of that barge. But if you're in the fog and you decided, you know, I'm just going to hang close to the bank, I'll just be in a place where I can see the bank and I'm just going to go downstream and I'll be fine. If you come across a barge that's tied up, you know, they may or may not have their motors running. You may or may not hear them. You may or may not see those lights on the front. But they had several paddlers that went by at night while they were tied up in the fog. And, you know, we got some pretty heated phone calls from those guys, you know, that they were not impressed with the safety decisions that people were making when they had paddlers cruising feet away from their towboat because they thought they would hang close to the bank and be safe. That's just yet another thing that you can't see on your chart plotter or whatever, you know, you might be following. So, and there's another question that just popped up and it's on this topic. So I'm just going to ask that. Eric Turcoat is asking, how long does fog typically last and does it follow any pattern? You know, typically if once fog starts generating on the river, you know, it sort of depends on a lot of factors. And that's why, you know, Scott's saying it's tough to predict. If you have a light breeze of 5 miles an hour, you might have a river that's generating quite a bit of fog. You'll see little wispy tornadoes coming off the river, but it may sort of blow off and never really collect in any particular place and never actually cause a big problem. But what, you know, tends to happen is as the river is bending around and you're following all these bends in the river, there'll be certain bends where that fog will just pile up in a giant pile. depending on, how much light's available, what the moon's doing, how much cloud cover there is, you might not quite realize that you're hitting one of those giant fog banks at night until you're really in it. And that's, one reason to really just pay close attention, talk to other people on what they're seeing and hearing. And as soon as you do run into one of those fog banks, they tend to go on for a while. They're not there. If you hit a real thick batch of fog, chances are it's going to go for a couple of miles, or at least 1 mile, and that's time to get off. That's it. And Eric was also asking, does it follow any pattern? And the patterns are wildly random. And I don't think there's any generalization that you can make about Missouri River fog, except that one generalization that it tends to pile up in certain bends.
All right. And Scott, how are we looking? I mean, heat is always an issue on the 340. It's looking like it won't be too big of an issue this year. What about the one that no one thinks of? What about hypothermia on the river, getting cold on the river?
Yeah, I can't, I just sent out the safety boat dispatch to all our safety boats. We have a super experienced crew. I think every boat has someone who's been a safety boat multiple years. So it's all review for them. But one of the things I always mention is we talk about heat stroke and we talk about signs of someone who's in heat distress and what you do about that. But then I follow that up with a paragraph on, the shivering paddler at night who absolutely can't control his breathing or her breathing, can't even grip the paddle properly and maneuver their boat properly because they're shivering so much. And it might be 85 degrees, but they're shivering. And, that's because it was 95 degrees all day. They've stripped down to the bare minimum of clothing. Their calorie intake is not proportionate to how much calories they're using. They might, of course, you're going to be damp. Even if it hasn't rained, you're going to be damp from paddle splash. And so I see it a lot in tandem boats because I think in a solo boat, you're paddling more. I mean, you tend to paddle more. And so that's one solution. If you feel yourself start to shiver, just do some sprints, count 30 strokes and just sprint it as fast as you can and get your body temperature back up. You can put on, your Mylar space blanket that you're required to carry. You can, put that on under your life jacket, strap your life jacket over it. That'll heat you up pretty fast. If you've got like a hat you can wear or something like that. But it's important to have some extra clothing aboard your boat just in case that you're going to get cold. Just a windbreaker or something can do it. But, we've seen tandem teams where the one guy starts shivering, the other guy's paddling. And so he stops paddling to try to, I don't know what, try to control his shivering or something. And so he just gets in this spiral. But we've had literally calls where it's, hey, my partner can't stop shaking. We need somebody to come get him. And we put these guys in sleeping bags on our boats. We're sweating, they're freezing. It's a weird thing. But it goes back to make sure your calories are coming in at a good pace, make sure you've got the right clothing for the nighttime, and make sure you're paddling enough to stay warm.
I just want to add to that, ground crews, watch your paddler when they come off the river at night. The same thing can happen at a checkpoint. You're getting a lot of radiant heat coming off the river. So you have basically nice warm temperatures when I'm 2 feet from the water. But when I walk up the ramp, at Miami or wherever else, suddenly I find myself freezing. Trust your paddler. That's actually happening. The best thing to do is either put them back on the water or get them a sleeping bag, get them in the Mylar, emergency blanket, whatever it is, just let them warm up. So it's just one of those, you see it on the water, you see it off the water.
Yeah, good point.
So with the flooding, for either one of you, they're familiar with it. How do the buoys look? I know that they were in position and there were tons of them as of June 21st. And I imagine many of them are floating past Vicksburg at present. So how's it looking out there?
Well, I was out on the river this weekend in a few locations helping out on the Freedom Race. and was frankly like pretty surprised how many buoys were out there, and that the river was coming up at that time, and quite a few of them were in that weirdo, half buried in the water stage that buoys on the Missouri River can be, where you might just see one little piece of them poking up and they sort of bob up and down in the water. And it feels like there are more buoys than there were in the past. I think there's some navigation issues after the 2019 flood, and the Coast Guard has put out, I think, more buoys than they used to. We've seen quite a few, floating by as well, and they're all over the banks as well. So there's definitely some missing buoys, but I was surprised how many were out there.
And are they in position, or are they in the middle?
Yeah, it's a mix. I mean, the flood definitely moves them around, but I was surprised how many were, more or less where they should be. But it doesn't take much, for a buoy to encroach in the channel, where if you're relying on, your Pro Paddler app or some other navigation device, where you certainly might encounter buoys that are in what is supposed to be the channel, which is the annoying thing about buoys. At least one of many annoying things about buoys. Not a big fan.
Scott, anything to add?
I just hope that we're getting close to the age of the buoy being over. I've been on the Mississippi River lately, and they are starting to experiment with something called virtual buoys that every towboat has a chart plotter, and they can do downloads all the time and updates. And so the Coast Guard, I think, is looking at that concept of they can virtually put buoys on chart plotters so the towboats can know where the shoaling is, and they don't have to plant a physical trap in the river for paddlers and fishermen to have to deal with. So let's hope we get there. Technology's ready for it.
And we talk about buoys all the time, but I'm not sure it gets across how serious these are. So do either of you have stories about paddlers' run-ins with buoys that you can share?
I mean, there's stories of boats being flipped over by buoys, boats being severely damaged by buoys. But mostly, I mean, it's glancing blows mostly, thankfully. But, a buoy attracts snags, other things. So a buoy can grab a tree, and now you're looking at hitting a tree or getting stuck to a tree. So they're just, thankfully at night, you certainly can hear most of them. And you should always have a good flashlight sitting in the bottom of your boat or on a chain around your neck or whatever your system is, that you can just pull it up, hit the light, and scan the river real quick, put it back down, and you'll see them. At least they're usually pretty reflective.
Yeah. Steve, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, interestingly enough, I haven't experienced anyone being hit that I've personally dealt with. I've heard a lot of the stories that Scott's talked about, but the buoys are large. If they're generally on the Missouri River 6 to 8 feet tall, if you pulled it out of the water and stood it up on land, and they're a giant hunk of metal. So nothing to mess around with. I hear people joking about tying up to them and, relaxing and taking a break tied up to a buoy. And I just can't emphasize enough how that's a terrible idea that you need to avoid at all costs. In fact, tying up to anything in the Missouri River current when you're in a paddle craft is a really bad idea. It's not apparent how much strength that the water of the Missouri River has, how much power it's getting, until it comes up against an immovable object. And that will show you the power of the river. So, definitely if you need to stop, go over to the side, or most of what you need to do, you can do by just floating down the river. Just stop paddling and do what you need to do while you're floating, still making miles. That's always a good way to go.
Yeah, just if you're a solo paddler, don't sleep on the river.
Yeah.
Pull over, that's a very bad idea.
Good point. Sleeping is not something to be done in a boat on the river. Absolutely. If you're
So what can we expect regarding barges this year? It seems like barges have become a bigger and bigger issue in the race. 2012, my first year, there was a single barge that I came across at the very end. And then the last few years, it seems like we're coming across 5, 6 or more. So what are we looking at? And is our night barges going to be an issue this year?
It's too early to tell right now, Chris, unfortunately. And we will try to provide an update to folks at registration check-in with the best information we have at the time. Things change fast, and it's honestly, a week out right now, and that's too long to actually know what's really going to be happening. But yeah, 5 years ago, there were 3 barge companies, 3 companies that were moving freight on the Missouri River with any regularity. And now there's at least 6. So that traffic has doubled, and some of those companies have added additional towboats. So yeah, it's not a mirage that barge traffic has really picked up on the Missouri River. It absolutely has. We do communicate with all of those companies before the race. They're all aware the race is happening. And throughout this week, I'll be talking to all of them. And we also have direct phone connection to towboat pilot houses. So we will be definitely communicating with folks and updating to the best of our ability through the Race Owl texting our racers and ground crews when we know exactly what's going to be going on. And as far as will barges be tying up at night, again, we don't have an answer to that yet. They generally reserve their right to not make a decision on that until that night of. We have a couple companies that will probably give us a heads up that they plan on going at night as the next few days come in. So we'll have a better idea on that. It's a super great question, and we always hope that the companies will make a small sacrifice for this one race that happens on the Missouri River for the safety of everybody. But time is money to those guys, just like it is everybody else. And it's not always in the cards that they can do that. So.
All right. And Scott, when we're dealing with barges, everyone thinks of the upstream barge during the day. We've all seen that. And it's discussed a lot. What about downstream barges? What about barges at night? What should we know? When should we run from Washington thinking it's a barge?
So it's, again, Steve is great about communicating to the barge industry, and they have great respect for River Relief and what they do. So that relationship is a big advantage for us. And as Steve collects that information, we try by evening to have a barge update that we will push out via text and kind of let everybody know. It's not guaranteed that you're going to get that text, depending on, cell service and so on. And it may not be perfect depending on the speed of the barge and what they're encountering. But roughly, it might say, the towboat Mary Lynn is moving upstream from Washington, mile 68, and will be, traveling throughout the night, headed for Herman by sunrise or whatever. So you'll know if that's a factor for you or not. And as far as an upstream barge at least has the advantage of more control over steering and speed than a downbound barge. A downbound barge has to go, in order to maintain steerage, has to go faster than the water, just like if you have a rudder. So they, you need to give them more room even, and you need to be more aware that they're coming from behind you. So if you've got your AirPods in and you're cranking the music and you're not paying attention to what's behind you, you may not know that he's trying to get around you and you're right in his way. So I would make sure you're aware and you're keeping an eye behind you. Some people put a mirror on the deck of their kayak so they can always see behind them, or they wear one of those biking clip on your hat mirrors, or you just don't turn your music up so loud that you might not know that that's happening. But he will blow his horn, and hopefully that'll get your attention. And you've been very thorough in your videos about how to get out of the way of a barge upbound or downbound. It's a big river, really. Google a picture of barges on the Missouri River and you'll see that there's tons of room, and there's a lot of room for a canoe to get around any kind of navigation out there.
Okay. And there's a question from Eric saying that he found a Missouri River navigation Facebook page from the Army Corps of Engineers. They have a daily list of barges, basically asking if that's a reliable source.
Yeah, that generally is a reliable source. There occasionally will be things that sneak in that don't get captured in that page. They generally put those out every morning during the work week, so Monday through Friday. So, but I'll be in phone communication with Dennis, who puts that page together every day. And we'll be triangulating on what information that he has, and he shares everything that he can with us. And then he's also, every time he's talking to towboat pilots on the river, he will always be talking about the race and what people can expect from that. And I'll be talking to all those towboat pilots too. Dennis shares whatever contact information he has with them. It's a great source, and if your ground crew can access those, it's really helpful. They come out in the morning, but they are based on, the best available knowledge to Dennis, and if Dennis can't get a hold of somebody, that barge may be 100 miles downstream further than that page says. Those things definitely happen.
All right. So what are some of the safety issues that maybe racers haven't considered? Lesser known things that we should know.
So I would say you have to be aware of your body. You are going to, if you've never done anything like this before, you're going to experience all kinds of physical phenomena that you have never had happen to you before. And that could be alarming. Certainly one of those things is going to be just fatigue, mental fatigue. There are sometimes people who reach a point where they are seeing things in the trees, things that aren't really there, or as you indicated, you might come around the bend and see the town of Washington and think, it's a barge or something like that. So, I think it's good at night. It's a good practice. 99% of you are not trying to win a trophy. So you're just trying to finish and have a good time and finish safely. So it's a good idea to travel in a group at night. There's certainly enough paddlers out there to pod up in groups of 3 or 4. It's a lot easier to stay awake. It's a lot more fun. You have a lot more eyes who are looking at the situation and seeing, what is up ahead and what's the best decision here. Is this fog? Should we pull over? Is that a buoy over there? I heard there's a barge coming. Do you see that? Does that look like a barge? I mean, those kind of conversations make the 8 hours of darkness that we have to deal with go by very quickly and safely. So again, on those bunny hops that you're strategizing and you're trying to decide, well, should I leave, Jeff City? It's 2 a.m. I don't know. If you see 3 or 4 other boats getting ready to go, then maybe that's your decider right there. Like, hey, these guys are going. I'll just join up with them and, make it these last 4 hours till the sun comes up with a group rather than hitting it solo. That always makes me feel better as a safety boat guy when I see groups leaving Miami in the middle of the night. They just met they just met that maybe at Waverly, but now they're buddies and they're going to do the rest of the race together. And I think that's really crucial. I would say too, I see, the rule is you have to wear a PFD, and we stress that rule more and more every year. That was included in my dispatch today, that if you see somebody violating this rule, and most of the time we've told people put your PFD on, they've simply forgotten. Like, they got to a checkpoint, they took it off, they laid it in the bottom of their canoe. Now they're getting ready to go again. It's still in the bottom of the canoe. They're kissing their wife goodbye. They're sliding it in. They don't have the thing on, and we tell them, hey, don't forget your PFD. That's most of the instances. Sometimes there's people who are actively trying not to wear their PFD for whatever reason. I can't imagine. But if we see somebody who is skirting this rule intentionally, the safety boats are supposed to take a picture of it. First, they're supposed to tell them to put their PFD on. They can take a picture of it if this is somebody they've had to deal with a couple times, and send me the boat number, and we will assess a time penalty on that boat for not following this simple rule. And if it's really a chronic problem, we'll just disqualify the boat, because you're putting yourself at risk, obviously, but you're also creating a dangerous situation for whoever's going to have to try and help you if you end up swimming in the river. So I would say wearing a properly fitted PFD, wearing it properly. If you're wearing a belt inflatable, you know how that thing works. You've tested it. You understand what happens when it deploys and how you put that on once it's deployed. And then, just I would say, be aware. If you see somebody not wearing their PFD, definitely nudge them in that direction.
Okay. Steve, anything to add? Things that safety issues that paddlers don't necessarily consider?
I'm sorry. Nothing is specifically coming to mind right now.
No, that's fine.
Scott really hit quite a few. One thing that I do like to put out there, because people new to the Missouri River are sometimes surprised by the current. If you paddle the upper Mississippi River, for example, or any of our river systems that have lock and dam systems on them, or if you're accustomed to paddling on lakes, the current of the Missouri River can catch you by surprise. And there are some tricks that you learn about how to utilize the current, and also, how to safely exit the current. And one thing I do like to point out to people is, if you decide you need to pull over on a riprap bank, and the riprap is the rock that the Corps of Engineers has placed alongside the river, usually that riprap will be on the channel side of the river, so the part of the river where the current is moving fastest. And there may be situations where you have to pull over and stop on that channel side of the river, where the river can be moving pretty fast right next to rocky shores. Just one little tip: if you're landing in a situation like that, the best thing to do is to actually turn your canoe and point upstream first, and then ferry over to the side of the river to land, rather than landing with the current head first into a rocky bank like that. So that's something that people will quickly learn once they've dealt with the current a few times. The same goes for most of the boat ramps. You're actually going to be going a little downstream of that boat ramp, and many of those ramps will have a wing dike, which is a rock jetty that sticks out, perpendicular from or slightly pointed downstream from the bank of the river. A lot of boat ramps will have a wing dike like that upstream of that boat ramp. And so it's often a good idea to go a little downstream of the ramp, and then you turn and face upstream, and there will often be an eddy, so like a circular current there by the ramp that you can catch and kind of ride or paddle back up to the ramp. So rather than just sort of aiming straight for the ramp and going at it, it's usually a good idea to kind of go a little bit past it and then turn and paddle into the ramp.
All right.
Oh, I've got, Steve, you made me think of another one that we see all the time. Um, After you've been paddling for several hours and you finally make it to that ramp and you exit, the volunteers help get your boat stable and you climb out and you're knee deep in the water and you start walking up that ramp. We see it every year. It's kind of a vertigo, loss of balance thing, but they will fall backwards. Because the ramp is tilted up. And so, they're trying to walk up this thing and they think they're standing up straight, but they're actually leaning back a little bit and they fall backwards. And so we will say to you at the ramp, we will say, lean forward, lean forward, lean forward. If you don't look like you're steady on your feet. And that's just a good practice to get into walking up a ramp. It's way better to fall forward if you're going to fall and catch yourself with your hands than it is to fall backwards and possibly hurt yourself pretty bad on a boat ramp. Also, the boat ramps after a high water event can be pretty slick with mud. If we got a falling river, it's just going to keep peeling back more and more mud, exposing more and more mud. We've seen ground crews slip and fall at the bottom of ramps. I mean, everybody just needs to be super careful on those boat ramps for sure.
Okay. Any tips for ground crew? Things that they should know, things that you've run into?
I mean, I would just say you're going to have a great time. You're going to meet a bunch of people. You're going to travel with the same group of cars all week long. You're going to travel with the same group of safety boats all week long. So, be as prepared as you can. Have as much information as you can about what boat ramps are out there so you have options for your paddler. I think, it's good to surprise you, to wave at your paddler from a ramp they weren't expecting you at, just be there in case they need something. I would say sometimes surprise your paddler with a treat they're not anticipating, whether that's, cut up cantaloupe or strawberries or just something that you hand them right as you send them on their way. You drop it in their lap and they're like, oh my gosh, that was the best thing ever. I would say it's important for you to try to get some sleep as well. In whatever circumstance that looks like. There are a lot of deer at night in Missouri. You should definitely watch out for that. You're going to be driving through some back roads and there's a lot of wildlife out there. Once you get to know the little ground crew pack that you're traveling with, great idea to get each other's phone numbers. So, you can call each other if there was something strange that happened, flat tire, car trouble, need a jump. So, just be the resourceful person that you already are, but don't be afraid to reach out to folks and make a bunch of friends out there.
And Scott, what about children?
Children are great, but I mean, there are some stories that Steve has a good story that I will have him tell about, you need to watch your kids out there around the river and around railroad tracks. Steve, why don't you tell us your tale?
Well, first of all, hello, and it is so good to see you. I'm glad you joined us, but yeah, one example. Okay, so here's the thing about boat ramps, right? So it's hot out. It's super hot, and you want to cool off. Your family wants to cool off. The kids want to cool off. And boat ramps generally, depending on the river level, generally will have relatively calm water right there, especially if it's a little lower. You might have a little eddy right there, and it seems like a safe place for kids to play in the water and cool off. But the thing is about boat ramps is as you walk out, they go down. And so it doesn't take too long for a kid to walk out on a boat ramp before their feet aren't touching the ground anymore, right? So, so first of all, if your children are playing anywhere near the Missouri River, you need to keep eyes on them absolutely at all times. That is your job. If you're okay with your kids being near the Missouri River, you need to have eyes on them. And number two is they absolutely need to be wearing a life jacket. If their feet are even in the water at all, those kids need a life jacket. And that doesn't include the little water wing things that you put on the side. An actual life jacket that child can wear. And if they do walk out to where they can't touch the bottom anymore, if they're wearing a life jacket, they're gonna float away wherever the river's going. And that's why you need to have eyes on those kids for sure. So, I have experienced a time where I was just sitting just below a boat ramp and a couple kids walked out and then the river took them downstream. And one of them had the little water wings on and the other one didn't have a life jacket at all. And I was right there and I jumped in without thinking and without putting my life jacket on, which was a huge mistake. But we did manage to get those kids really right back to shore and calmly. And everything was totally cool. But it's one of those situations where it ended up well because there were many people paying attention at the boat ramp, even though the parents happened to not be paying attention, unfortunately. So yeah, that's the important thing. But when it comes to railroad tracks, same thing. And
Waverly.
As far as ground crews in general, I'm not sure about all these boat ramps, but like, I believe Napoleon and Waverly are two examples where there are railroad tracks really close to the river and to the boat ramp, but they don't have gates, that close if a train's coming. So, everybody has got to be on their toes and paying close attention to what's going on, looking both directions and keeping an eye on those kiddos. And I'm sorry, I was blabbing that whole time, but do you have anything you want to say? Because you've been, before she disappears.
She's behind me. You just can't see her.
Yeah, well, she's been on the race many times, and I imagine she's got some good stories to share.
So we put a PFD on her at every ramp. Frequently, there's a harness, so there will be a rope with a carabiner attached to the PFD and attached to my wife or the other ground crew, just to make sure, because if she gets caught in the current, we don't want to catch her 9 miles later. We'd rather catch her right away. And then finally, paddlers, you're not generally looking for people who are 2 foot or 3 foot tall. The first 2015 or so, I was at Waverly. I'm holding my fancy carbon fiber wing blade paddle down to my side, and I didn't realize that I whacked this one right under the eye, and she started bleeding profusely. And then I was yelling from the river as I was leaving, hey, it's... I'll stop. You're going to haunt me with this. This is horrible. It turned out to be not too big of an issue, but watch out for the small people around you because we're frequently not watching as carefully as we could be because we're not really, entirely with it through much of the race. So that's pretty much, but keep them on something so that they're attached to someone with that PFD so they don't go flying down river, because you step off the side of a ramp, you could end up in 6 feet of water, especially after a flood event. So otherwise, what do we need to know about safety boats? Specifically, what do they have available, and at what point are we hitting disqualification for accepting help, etc. during the race? I'm not sure who would be more appropriate for this one, but okay, Steve.
Oh, I actually meant Scott. Scott has the most experience with this, so I'm still learning all of the rules.
So I've always said that a safety boat, if you need water, any kind of liquid, and a safety boat has it, they will give it to you. I mean, if you wave us down and you say, I ran out of water, do you got anything? Absolutely, we'll give you whatever. Some races don't allow that. We absolutely will do that. Anything we've got, you've got. Let's say your rudder breaks and you're pulled over on shore. Can you help me fix my rudder? Yes, we've got some tools. We will try our best to help you fix your rudder. But here's a scenario like, hey, my rudder's broken. Can you haul me back up to the ramp that I left 10 miles ago so that my ground crew can fix my rudder? No, we can't do that. That would be a situation where you would, you're done with the race at that point. If we have to put your canoe aboard a boat and haul you someplace, you're done. Or if we have to, bring your mechanic, the only guy you'll let work on your boat, we can't deliver him to you in the middle of nowhere. I mean, at some point you have to realize, man, I either have to limp this thing to the next checkpoint or, I'm just done with the race. So Typically, anytime you're getting a ride in the safety boat or your boat's getting a ride in the safety boat, that has reached a point where you are no longer in the race. However, there may be some situation that I haven't yet conceived of. And so I tell the safety boats, call me, send me a text or call me, and we'll discuss what needs to be done. In general, let's say you call and say, man, I'm done with the race. You know, I'm 5 miles downstream of Glasgow. You know, I want to be done. Depending on the situation, you may have to ride on that safety boat all the way to Franklin Island, because we're not going to load you up and plow upstream past a bunch of other racers, creating a huge wake to get you back to Glasgow. It's really situation specific, but first of all, there's no reason you should leave Glasgow and quit 5 miles later. You should never have left Glasgow in the first place. But, you know, most often it's, you know, they're halfway somewhere and they decide they can't make it. Their elbow is swelling up or something, you know, significant is happening. We will generally always take you to the downstream checkpoint because that's less disruptive to the race. But yeah, there's, you know, don't hesitate to ask a safety boat for help. If you're not feeling well, we've had people say, I don't feel so good. I think I can make it the last 7 miles to the next checkpoint. Will you stay with me? And absolutely, we will do that. And unless there's some emergency we're rushing to, we will stay alongside you and make sure you get there. So, you know, just ask, flag us down and ask. You have to be very clear that you are flagging us down. We will offer you the thumbs up if we see something that we're not sure. I tell them, you know, if you see somebody, especially in a solo boat, who's not paddling and they're just drifting, and you watch them for a while and they just don't pick up the paddle, that's somebody that you want to check on and make sure that they're coherent, make sure that they give you the thumbs up back. If you see somebody pulled over to the side, you know, 99 times out of 100, we know you're just taking care of business or something off to the side, but it's their job to check and make sure that that boat has an occupant somewhere around and that we get a thumbs up from that person, even if we have to wait a little while for them to reappear. But yeah, they're a resource for you. But you know, when you talk about storms and fog, they will pull over. They're not going to risk their lives or the lives of other paddlers by going through low visibility situations. So we just make sure everybody knows when you leave a ramp, especially when it's getting dark, it's going to be dark before you get to your next ramp. Take everything with you that you would need to spend that entire night outside without resources from us, camping essentially, because for whatever reason, you couldn't make it to the next boat ramp.
All right. Sorry, typing an answer here real quick. So
one other thing I want to add about safety boats too is like your experience with safety boats will change as the race goes on. By the end of the first night, we will have paddlers strung out from basically Waverly to
Jeff City, at least.
Jeff City, right? Yeah. By the time the first paddler hits shore Wednesday afternoon, evening, at the finish line, the last paddler will be at Glasgow. So that's sort of the moment right there when the race is the most spread out. And so we've designed our safety boat coverage for that moment. And at that time in the race, like it wouldn't be surprising if the only safety boat that you see is at a checkpoint or at a paddle stop, or, you know, you might go hours without seeing a safety boat. But they're all moving through the pack, you know, they're all in the midst, and they're designed to be spaced out enough so that if somebody does call and needs help from a safety boat, that there's one in reasonable distance to respond to you by going downstream. By the time we get to Thursday and Friday, all of those safety boats that are moving downstream are starting to collect together. And all of a sudden, you can't turn a corner without seeing a safety boat, and that's just the nature of how this race operates. We design our safety boat coverage for that moment when the race is most stretched out, and we've got people all along that race course. So when that moment is happening, and that moment lasts for something like a day, if you call and you really need help from the safety boat, there might be a response time depending on weather situations and all kinds of things. It would be impossible for us to have a safety boat literally on every bend of the river. So that's why Scott always really emphasizes the importance of every boat on that river is a safety boat, and we are each other's safety boats as well. So you see something odd going on with a paddler, same thing Scott was talking about that safety boats are looking out for. We all kind of need to keep an eye out on those things for ourselves too. Is there someone that looks like they might be struggling, or doesn't look like they're fully engaged in what's going on? It's definitely worth the time to check in on that person.
Right. And then I've got some kind of quick FAQs here. So either Scott or Steve jump in as it applies, I guess. What happens if a racer misses a checkpoint? In other words, they didn't check in as they went past Waverly or something along those lines. What should they do?
Well, so everybody's going to check in at call point. We're not letting you out of there Monday night until you have performed one check-in. So you should all have that experience. And as you pass Waverly, you don't have to stop at Waverly, but you do need to check in as you pass. If something goes wrong and your phone doesn't have a signal or something like that, you can't get the text to send as a paddler, you're at Waverly, you can talk to a safety boat and say, hey, do you have a signal? Can you help me check in? Can you check me in? I mean, I end up checking in the same guy at every checkpoint. There'll be 2 or 3 guys that just have never, gotten their phone to work all week. And so, yeah, Bill, I already got you. You're checked in. But if you completely missed the checkpoint, like you, I guess, just spaced it out or something like that, it causes a huge problem. Like, we close that checkpoint at 8 p.m. and by 8:30, we know the 7 people who didn't, do it right. And our volunteers have to focus a lot of energy trying to hunt down these people via phone calls, hopefully resolving it before we have to execute some kind of search. Now, there's usually a good reason why it happened. Your ground crew did something incorrect, or she checked you in for Glasgow when she meant to check you in for Waverly or something like that. And we figure it out. But if you're missing it, this is something that, and I haven't addressed this completely with Steve yet, but sometimes there's people who I think intentionally are not checking in at a checkpoint. They'll check in at Waverly, they'll check in at Glasgow. They're really fairly fast racers. These aren't the cream of the crop fastest. These are generally people who finish on a Thursday, midday Thursday. But for whatever reason, they think that by checking in, they're creating some kind of advantage for their competition. So they will delay their check-in. If we see that happening, my feeling is we're going to start doing a time penalty on those folks too, because, part of the race is that you check in as you pass the checkpoint. If we figure out that you passed the checkpoint and then didn't check in for 6 hours later, then, I feel like that's a multiple minute penalty off your time because you're not abiding by the rules. You're checking in before the cutoff time, but you're 50 miles further downstream than when you actually met that cutoff time. So that is a possible penalty for egregiously, intentionally not checking in as you pass a checkpoint. And this is reported to us by fellow racers, right? That's how we hear about it. Like, hey, boat 1122, he did not check in at Jeff City. And he checked in right before he got to Herman, and he still hasn't checked in at Herman. I mean, that's how we hear about it. And so, first of all, you're not really gaining any advantage for yourself because all the other ground crews are watching as you go by, and they are telling your competition, he's 7 minutes ahead of you. You can catch him. But I think there's some thought that like, well, if I manipulate my check-ins on Race Owl, I will gain some strategic advantage. And if we see that happening, that there would be a penalty for that. But if you're just, if you don't have a cell signal or something like that, and you're making a good faith attempt to get that text sent at the proper time, or you're asking a safety boat, hey, I'm trying to check in, my phone's dead or whatever, then we will help you with that. But you have to make that effort.
Okay. And a couple of yeah, go ahead.
Well, and maybe part of your question was what happens if you miss a cutoff time? If you miss one cutoff time, you're out. There's no, unless there's been a legitimate reason, like let's say there is a big thunderstorm, at 7 p.m. before Waverly closes, and a bunch of people who were on pace to make that 8 p.m. cutoff do the right thing and safely pull off the river, and there would be an exception made for that. Same with fog. I always worry. We have an 8 a.m. cutoff at Herman. If you're traveling that stretch and you're trying to make that 8 a.m. cutoff and there's fog at the Gasconade River, for example, we want you to pull over. Don't worry about the 8 a.m. cutoff at Herman. And we will know that there's fog there. I will know there's fog there because I will have stopped right before the fog as well. So you'll probably be hanging out with me all night. And then when the sun burns it off by 7 a.m., maybe you're not going to make it to Herman till 9. We understand that. And we know there was a legitimate safety reason for you not making it to Herman. So you would be offered the grace to continue in that scenario if it's a safety issue.
Let's talk about the finish line. It's something we don't talk about a lot. First of all, where is the official finish line? Is it a line across the river? Is it the ramp? Is it the beach? Where is it?
Okay. I asked Katie, my wife, this question because she's the one who directs all those volunteers. And it is definitely that you have to, touch your nose of your boat to the mud or sand adjacent to the ramp that's there that we're using as the finish line this year. So, anywhere within a reasonable distance of that, I don't know, 7-10 feet, you can't stop 100 yards upstream and call that a finish. You have to be close to the ramp. Put the nose of the boat has to touch. We always have ground crews yelling, just go past the ramp, just go past the ramp. Don't get out of the current. No, you have to come to the ramp and touch because we do have some finishes that are sprint finishes and it's rare, but it's going to be whoever puts their nose in the mud first at that ramp. We also have some finishes where, again, that group of guys and gals who just met at Caw Point and now they're best friends forever and they've traveled the whole river together and there's a pack of 5 of them and they all want to finish together. Like no one wants to beat anybody. And so we honor that. They all come in at the same time. We give them all the same to the minute finish time so they can have that experience. But yes, according to Katie, and she's the boss down there, the nose of your boat has to make contact with planet Earth adjacent to the ramp. And
at the finish line, are there going to be volunteers this year carrying the boats up the hill at the finish, or is it up to our ground crews? Or
we have volunteers and they get exhausted just like everybody does. We would prefer if your ground crew is able to help you and you're able that you guys do it. We will be there to help. If a lot of the paddlers aren't in shape to do it, a lot of the ground crews aren't in shape to do it. So we have people there to help. A lot of people don't want their boat lifted a certain way. They certainly don't want it dragged on the concrete. So we wait to hear from you and we will ask, like, do you need help? Can we help you out of the boat? All those things are available. This year we are not, we are using the ramp. So it's going to be a consistent place to walk up out of the water. It won't be like sometimes we have the big cliff that you have to climb up at the finish line. We won't be dealing with that. So it will be the ramp. It'll just be one more ramp, the last ramp of a long, blurry week of boat ramps.
And going back to the start, will the hotel have breakfast on Tuesday early for racers?
I am told that they will have what they call a grab and go breakfast, which is, in a bag, I guess, something like that. They say they've done it the last few years. I'm not, I have a hotel
breakfast sandwiches and
up there. So it's some kind of breakfast sandwich maybe, or some kind of wrap. You should check with them the night before if you're staying at the hotel. And I mean, I've definitely pounded this on Facebook and in the dispatch, but if you're staying at the hotel, seriously consider, especially if you're a tandem start, seriously consider walking that Riverfront Heritage Trail down into Caw Point, pull your little wagon with what you need. It will save you a lot of hassle, and you will get to Caw Point quicker than if you're trying to drive in after those solos have already been. I mean, the solos will fill the place up at, I'm guessing, 5:30 or 6 a.m. The interior of Caw Point Park will be filled with cars. And then we will be doing we have 300 or so spaces outside of Caw Point Park that North Point Development has generously said we can use again. And once those are full, you will just get looped in through the parking lot and sent back out to the Fairfax Traffic Way. And then you just need to drive back up to the hotel, park in that parking area, and walk down. So it's a nice walk. I think you're going to enjoy it. It'll get the jitters away, and you end up right in the park. It's beautiful.
And is there anything we should know that you or Steve want us to know about launching on Tuesday morning?
If you've ever been there, it's crazy, and everybody tries to get in 15 minutes before the start. There will be lines of people who aren't in the water when the gun goes off. If you really want to be in, you got to get in early. You got to get your feet wet. It's so funny. We see people who are so worried about getting their feet muddy, getting mud in their boat. At Caw Point, they're like, rinsing their feet before they put their foot in. You got to just surrender to the mud, surrender to the situation. The sooner you do that, the better time you're going to have. Just get in there, get muddy, get mud in your canoe. You can sponge it out later. You're not going to care. Use the point, as Chris has illustrated in his videos. You walk out to the point. It's basically a boat ramp. There's some other kind of guerrilla places. They have finished the construction on that bridge that we've seen the last 2 years. If you walk up that trail or that road they built for that construction, you can actually put in under that bridge. It will depend on water level how convenient it is, but it's just riprap right down into the water. That might be another place some people with a sturdy aluminum or Kevlar canoe might give a try at. Immediately adjacent to the ramp, on the right side of the ramp, there's tons of room for people to put in. And I stand there every year begging people. I'm just pointing, saying, here's a spot right here. If you want to skip the line, come in, and I'll get 2 or 3 that, jump the line and get right in. But, a lot of people want to use that ramp because they don't want to get their boat muddy. And I got news for you. It's going to be muddy. Soon.
And I can't emphasize this enough. You can make 3 lines across the ramp for almost every boat. 90% of the boats there, you can do 3 lines across. And when you get in the water, ground crews, just push them out.
Yeah.
Just before they're ready. It's fine. Push them out. We cannot have people sitting there for 10 minutes trying to get everything in place. Just do the bare minimum, push out. You can fix things. You can come back to shore. Your ground crew can pop down and get you stuff, but push off, especially from the boat ramp. So I've got a couple of questions here we can go through. Shannon Robinson has asked a few, so I'll go through these here. Let's see. Are all previous webinar links now working? They are on YouTube on 340 Paddler. I don't know if they're all working on the River Relief page, Steve.
I mean, nobody's told me they weren't. So that,
Okay.
I don't sit around every day checking links, but if you do see, broken links, it helps if you let us know. That would be good. But as far as I know, the Riverleaf MR340 live page has links to all the webinars, but home base for that, like Chris said, is the 340 Paddler YouTube channel.
Okay. And Shannon also says that he saw on Facebook that someone was providing a barbecue truck at New Haven. Is this true? Confirmed? I haven't heard.
Yeah, so I have heard that is happening. I have not heard whether or not there are like specific hours that barbecue truck's going to be there, but there is a new barbecue restaurant in downtown New Haven, and they are planning on bringing food down to the New Haven ramp at some point during the week. I don't have confirmation on those hours though.
Okay.
Shannon, you are breaking some exciting news there for me. I had not heard that, so I appreciate you throwing that out there, and I hope I happen to catch that. We will have a safety boat at New Haven, but Steve's right. We cannot guarantee at what hours of day there will be resources there for the unsupported paddler, but we will have a boat there. Kent Robinson, longtime 340 veteran and safety boat veteran and board member of Missouri River Relief, will be spending the bulk of his week at the New Haven ramp.
Okay. And do you bring in porta potties to any of the checkpoints paddle stops? If so, which ones?
We have some at Lexington. This is augmenting what's already there. We have, I believe, Waverly, the city of Waverly brings one in at the downstream boat ramp, and there's facilities at the upstream boat ramp. We bring extras into Miami, which they already have one, but we bring in more. Glasgow, we don't bring in any. It's got multiple toilets in Glasgow. Franklin Island, if it's open, then we can get a truck in there. We will have toilets at Franklin Island. Catfish Katie's, if that ends up open, it will have toilet at the top of the ramp. Cooper's Landing, I don't know, Steve, what is...
Cooper's doesn't have physical bathrooms yet, but they have 3 porta potties there.
Okay. Yeah. Jeff City, we bring in toilets. Again, there's infrastructure there already, but we bring in extra. Herman has plenty. New Haven has good, toilet, a short walk away. Chamois has good toilets. What am I missing? Washington.
Yeah. I mean, pretty much everything. All of them have pit latrines, especially late in the race.
Yeah, Klondike has
children. Just make sure you go to the bathroom with them if they're very small, because you don't want them falling into the pit latrine.
Well, if they got their life jacket, Chris, I mean, come on. But yeah, and it's also a good idea. Bring extra toilet paper, because MDC does a great job of getting these toilets ready, but there is no way they can put enough toilet paper inside these things that it's going to last for all of us to come through those checkpoints. So don't walk into one without your little, roll that you're bringing in personally, because you may be shocked that there's nothing left in there.
Yeah, in a Ziploc bag, FYI.
Yeah.
And then a question from Denise Damon. Any information on where there are sand dredges this year?
All right. Well, I'm going to do the best I can to answer this question with the information I have, which is the Corps of Engineers barge report. And it'll take a second for me to do this. The thing is, this is going to change. They're going to decide sometime next week, like, okay, instead of being upstream of Jeff City, I'm going to move downstream of Jeff City. That happens all the time. But right now we've got one, and these are not going to be in order geographically. We've got one a little bit downstream of Jefferson City, 6 miles downstream of Jefferson City. There's also one 3 miles upstream of Jefferson City. Looks like we've got one 3 miles downstream of Washington, Missouri. Sorry, yeah, this takes a second. There'll be one probably about 10 miles downstream of the start in Kansas City. That's all I got here, but chances are there's more than that. And, those folks, something to know about sand dredges, just a few safety things. They're in the safety video that you have to watch, but, those sand dredges often have cables that come off of those dredges, stretching out in both directions that are keeping those stuck in place. So, not only do you need to go around the barge, you need to, the sand dredge, you need to go well around the sand dredge. And then just keep in mind that those things can be anywhere from, 1 mile to 5 or even more miles away from the sand plant that they're feeding. And so there will be towboats taking barges back and forth from the sand plant to the sand dredge. So you might see some activity that isn't showing up in your text messages, about barge activity. There can be, in addition to the barges moving all the way up and down the river hauling freight, there can be smaller towboats with barges running in between sand plants and those sand dredges. So sometimes they're zipping along a little speedier than the other ones. And it's just definitely something to keep an eye out. If you see a sand dredge, which are these kind of weird reptilian contraptions stuck in the middle of the river. If you see one of those, keep your eyes out for other towboats and barges that are servicing those.
All right. So I want to give you each an opportunity to kind of touch on anything that we missed. Scott, anything that you want everyone to know?
I know you've talked about the start quite a bit. The fire department will be there. Both Kansas City, Missouri fire departments will be there. If you get in any trouble at the confluence, if you find yourself swimming, I would say you want to stay with your boat. That's pretty much generally the rule, no matter what scenario you would find yourself capsized. You want to try to keep your hand on your boat. That's the safest thing you could do, unless you're heading for like a dangerous strainer or something like that. Stay with your boat and try to swim it to shore. Another thing you should certainly do, if you have time this week, if you haven't done it yet, is try to find a place where you can safely in shallow water practice what you would do if your boat was capsized. How would you pump it out? How would you get it ready for you to get back in? Is the gear that you have with you secured in a way that you're not going to have 17 things floating around you that you're trying to gather frantically in the dark? It's a good idea to have some kind of light source on your PFD. So if you find yourself separated from your boat, you have a way to signal, or you have a way to shine your light around to find your boat or your paddle, which you have hopefully taped some reflective tape around the handle so you can find it in the dark at night. Really what a paddler needs, if they lose everything else, they need their boat and their paddle. So if you can find those two things, everything's good. I think footwear, a lot of people wear water shoes, which is great, protects your feet and your boat. You'll be amazed at how quickly you will rub, to the bone, your heels if you're turning a rudder for 340 miles in a boat. It's a good idea to have footwear because you might end up having to walk out of a situation. You are stranded somewhere, and you look at your phone and you realize, well, gosh, if I walk 5 miles, I'm in a town and I've got help, but I don't have any shoes. So how do I do that? So, just be prepared for situations like that, I would say, is something to consider in these final days leading up. And keep an eye on the Facebook group. Ask us questions if you have any, because there are some rain events coming up, and we want to be on top of, if we did, I don't even want to say the F word, flood. But if something did get out of control, we would want to alert everyone as early as possible before folks start traveling to Kansas City.
And one thing I would add to if safety concerns and things to keep on your person, your cell phone, attach it to you or the PFD. It should not be in the boat and completely unattached, because if something happens, that's your lifeline, that's your link to the safety boats. So make sure it's on your person.
Yeah, good point. Waterproof. They make these great waterproof bags, little tiny dry bags for your cell phone, and definitely worth the $7 investment to have that.
I've got two things I want to mention too. Number one is mosquitoes. So with the flooding a couple weeks ago, there's a lot of standing water throughout the Missouri River Valley, and I personally have been experiencing mosquitoes along the river of an intensity that I haven't really experienced in most years. Now, mosquitoes do have a life cycle that's something like 10 days. It's entirely possible that could die down by the time this race happens. But looking at some of the standing water around, I doubt that. I think that mosquitoes are going to be pretty intense. Once you're on the river, you're not going to feel that. If you stop off on a sandbar somewhere that's not right next to the forest, they're not going to find you there in most cases. But at boat ramps, anywhere where there's slow standing water, they're pretty intense. So be prepared, bring bug spray in your boat. Your ground crew is going to need gallons of it. Those little thermocell things, those help, but if you can have bug netting, especially if you're a solo paddler with no actual ground crew, some kind of bug netting so that you can actually get the sleep that you need along the way. Those things are going to be life-saving for you, or, not life-saving, but you're going to be a lot happier, if you can keep those skeeters at bay. The other thing's the mud, right? So right now we just have another little spike in the river that happened this weekend. There's some more rain in the way. We might get another spike like that. Once the Missouri River starts dropping, it leaves mud everywhere. And sometimes that mud is actually firm sand, and you look at it and you're like, that's sand. I can step on that. Right next to that might be, waist deep pudding mud that is disguised as sand. Maybe it has a little sand on the top, just a little sand crust on the top, and it looks exactly like the mud right next to it. And the only way to know is to poke your paddle at it, stab it with your toe, test it out before you fully trust. Even if you really, really, really have to pee really bad, you got to test that mud first. I've lost count of how many people we've actually had to help out of the mud alongside the Missouri River, just because they really just needed to get out of their boat and sit on a sandbar. And it turns out that sand was actually pudding mud. And, that's only part of the safety hazards with mud. Scott already alluded to, mud on ramps, that there's the slick clay mud, there's the gooey pudding mud, I suspect that the Missouri Indians had probably 25 names for mud. There's many varieties of mud on the Missouri River. You're going to experience a lot of them, and some of them you just can't stand up in. It just wants you to go face planting on the ground. So take your time, be careful, look where your feet are, and test the mud. Never trust it.
And I should also point out, for those of you who grew up in the 80s, this is your chance to really understand what quicksand is and how dangerous it is. All of those children's shows where people got stuck in quicksand, this is your chance. My wife also walked in and handed me a knife, which sounds unusual, but she was actually pointing out that paddlers should have a knife with them. It's amazing for repairs, but also if you get caught in something while you capsize, any number of situations, it's good to have something available, and even a cheap knife attached to your PFD that can come out is a lifesaver in some circumstances. So that being said, there is not another 340 Live webinar currently scheduled because, of course, the 340 is next week. But I believe Steve has another webinar coming up on Wednesday that will be helpful for you. Steve?
Yeah, so same time, right? 6:30 on Wednesday. And this will be a discussion with John Marble. And John designed the Race Owl website and the Race Owl app and the 340 Pro Paddler app. So John Marble's going to run through the website and the Race Owl app. Everything that you need to know to make that function for race tracking, for checking in, and just kind of hitting the high points there. So that, again, will be recorded and we will be sharing that. And I may beg Chris to post it on his page as well. But it'll be on YouTube as well in case you miss it, and we'll share that on the Facebook group as well. Shannon is asking if we could run through the required gear for the race as our goodbye here.
Scott, do you have that off the top of your head?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff listed as suggested gear, and definitely, obviously, the PFD, the Mylar blanket is required that you have that. You need to have some kind of battery-powered flashlight. You need to have a cell phone aboard your boat and some means of extending battery life, whether that's an augmented battery or some kind of auxiliary charger for that. I think we have listed that you need a spare paddle. That has been amended that a tandem team does not have to carry. Any boat with 2 or more paddlers does not have to carry a spare paddle. We figure you're not going to lose all 3 paddles at once. But if you're a solo paddler, it's a good idea to have a spare paddle, even if it's just, even if you're a double blader, but you've got a little spare single blade somewhere strapped on your deck, is a really good idea. And they make some little miniature ones that you can use for that, to satisfy that. You're supposed to have a whistle on your PFD. That's a USCA, that's one of our insurance rules. You have to have navigation lights. Even if you swear you're not going to paddle at night, every boat has to have navigation lights, the red and green lights at the bow, the white light at the stern. Do yourself a favor and tape off the parts that shine towards you. Take the boat out in your garage or in your backyard and sit in it and try this at night and see what's going to irritate or bug you with those lights. Let's see. And I'm sure I'm forgetting one. But
I don't know if you mentioned the reflective blankets, the emergency.
Yeah, the Mylar reflective little tinfoil blankets. You should have, obviously you have to have boat numbers on both sides of your bow, or if you're a stand-up paddleboard, however that works with your geometry. You should have, another thing you should do is take your boat out in the dark and shine a flashlight on it and see if anything is reflective on that boat. If you just bought this boat from a guy and you don't have a lot of experience with it, a lot of these dark carbon fiber Texas style boats don't have any reflective surface on them anywhere. So make sure that, we can shine a light from a safety boat and find your boat by some reflective material. You can buy this stuff at Walmart or anywhere. It's just reflective tape. I would really recommend duct tape, maybe some simple screwdriver kit that can fix your rudder, whatever may come of that rudder. Yeah, I'd say, all the stuff we talked about, you're supposed to carry enough water to make the next checkpoint. You should have, especially at night, you should have a change of clothes. We recommend a way to start a fire, especially at night. So that can just be a Bic lighter stowed somewhere, right? That would be, again, in case you or your partner are shivering so uncontrollably that you can't solve the problem. I'm not recommending you start a forest fire in Missouri, but some crisis situation, it wouldn't hurt to have a little bit of an advantage. A little bit of rope is not a bad idea, can come in handy.
Enough rope to tow, I believe, is on the safety list, something like 20 feet or 50 feet or something.
Yeah, I mean, and I can't tell you, I don't remember any situation where that's been useful. I mean, all the safety boats have rope, but so I wouldn't agonize over that one.
It's something to tie your boat to something,
Yeah.
If you're stopping somewhere, don't trust that you just pull your boat halfway out of the water and it's going to be there when you come back 10 minutes later or you take a nap. Tie it to something for sure.
Yeah, that's a great idea. If you have a vessel that has if you've seen those kayak pumps that you can just pump a boat out really easily. I mean, I think that's a good idea in some situations if your boat can fill with water. A sponge is extremely useful for all kinds of things.
One additional thing that I want to point out that's not a required equipment for your boat, but could help you find lists like this. And so I'm going to just share my screen real quick. Okay, you guys seeing my web browser right now?
Yeah.
Cool. So this is the River Miles website. And over here we have the Race Resources tab. If you click down there, there's a lot of stuff here. Maps, all kinds of stuff. If you click this 340 resources page, there's a bunch of basic links that you need to know. Race dispatches, you've got to read all the race dispatches from beginning to end, all of them. There's 5 so far, and there might even be another one by the time of the race. Mandatory safety video, the race course map. This is something you can print out and laminate and keep with you. Your ground crew should definitely have it. Just a very simple way of looking at all the checkpoints and paddle stops. Some other links like river projections, MR340 paddler YouTube page. These are all important resources. The race forum is on here, the 340 Facebook group. All the answers you need are here. And we do have one more question. Is there a mask requirement at the start or anywhere else? In other words, a COVID precaution.
So Kansas City, Kansas was the last place along the race course that had a mask mandate, and that got lifted, I think, at the end of May or beginning of June. So there are no requirements that I know of any municipality. However, Missouri has a pretty high COVID rate right now and a pretty low vaccination rate right now. And so I would say just be aware. I mean, if you've been vaccinated, apparently there's not a lot to worry about in that situation. However, your young children may not have been vaccinated. Your ground crew, your Uncle Jim might be immunocompromised because of, a transplant or something. So, be aware that there is COVID in Missouri right now, and it's not necessarily super safe for an unvaccinated person who has any kind of health conditions. So, use your best judgment when deciding who should be coming with you on this. But if you are vaccinated and healthy, I'm not aware of any mask requirements for an outdoor event of this nature along the race course.
Yeah, the one that I have heard about is in Boone County. That's the county I live in, and it is not a requirement, but a new recommendation from Boone County that people wear masks indoors if they are not vaccinated. And again, it's just super important to remember that no child under 12 has been vaccinated. And those that believe that children are immune to COVID need to check the data, because that's not true.
Yeah. But we will have hand sanitizer at the check-in tables, multiple chances for you to even in a non-plague situation, it's a really good idea to have hand sanitizer. Your ground crew have it, or you have a little bottle on your boat, because you are going to be touching all sorts of things. You're going to become this biome that is going down the river, and some of that river water, is going to have some stuff in it that you don't necessarily want to have on your food while you're eating it. So wouldn't hurt to carry a little bottle.
Yeah, that's great advice.
All right. Well, that pretty much brings us to an end. We're running up against, actually, we blasted right through the time that we usually stop anyway, but that's fine. These things happen. So I do want to thank our guests, Steve Schnarr from River Relief. And again, reminder that River Relief will be having another webinar on Wednesday at 6:30 to deal with Race Owl Pro Paddler. They'll be talking to John Marble, the tech guy behind much of the 340. And thank you to Scott, our fearless and oftentimes sleepless leader, Mansker, who has come in and done this, helping us understand what we need to know going into the race a week from tonight. So until I see you all at Caw Point, paddle in the water.
Thank you, Chris, for all you've done, man.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you guys for coming on and sharing everything with us. It's definitely appreciated.
Thanks for renting a tux.
This isn't rental. Come on.